Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Learn English Podcast 360. Today, we're going to talk about two very important words in English, for and since. These words are very simple, and you will hear them almost every day in English conversations. But even though they are simple, they still confuse millions of English learners around the world. Maybe this has happened to you before. You start speaking English, your sentence begins well, and everything feels good. But then suddenly you stop and think, should I say for or since? And in that moment, the sentence stops and your confidence drops a little. If this has happened to you, don't worry. You are not alone. In today's episode, we are going to make these two words simple and clear. By the end of this episode, you will feel much more confident using for and since in real English conversations. And don't worry, today we are not going to study grammar like in a classroom. There will be no complicated rules, no difficult grammar terms, and no long lists to memorize. Instead, we will talk about real-life situations, real conversations, and simple ideas that make English feel natural. Because language is not only about rules. Language is about communication. And when something makes sense in your mind, it becomes much easier to say out loud. So let's begin with one big idea, time. To understand the difference between for and since, we only need to understand one simple idea about time in English. In everyday English conversations, we usually talk about time in two different ways. The first way is duration, and the second way is a starting point. Let's slow down and understand these two ideas. Duration means how long something continues. For example, imagine that you are studying English. You start studying, then 1 month passes, then another month, and then another. The action continues over time. That length of time is called duration. So duration answers the question, how long? Now, let's talk about the second idea, a starting point. A starting point means the moment when something begins. For example, Monday, last year, January, 2020, or yesterday. These are all moments when something starts. So in English conversations, we often talk about time in these two ways. We either talk about how long something continues or we talk about when it started. And this is exactly where our two words appear. The word for is used when we talk about duration, and the word since is used when we talk about the starting point. That is the main idea. But if this still feels a little abstract, don't worry. Let's bring this idea into real life. Let's start with the word for. The word for answers one very simple question. How long? Whenever you want to describe the length of time that something continues, for is usually the word you use. Let's look at some simple examples from daily life. I have studied English for 2 years. I waited for 10 minutes. She lived in New York for 5 years. We talked for a long time. In all of these sentences, we are talking about the length of time. 2 years, 10 minutes, 5 years, a long time. Notice something important here. The exact moment when the action started is not important. We are not talking about the first day or the first hour. We only care about the duration, how long the action continued. That is why we use the word for. Now, imagine a real-life situation. You meet a friend at a coffee shop and you start talking about learning English. Your friend asks you a simple question. How long have you been learning English? This is a very common question in conversation. You might answer, I've been learning English for 3 years. In this sentence, you are not explaining the exact day you started. You are simply sharing the duration 3 years. That is the information your friend wants, and that is why for is the perfect word in this moment. Let's look at a few more natural examples that people use every day. I have worked here for 6 months. We stayed there for a week. I practiced English for an hour yesterday. He studied for 3 hours last night. In all of these sentences, we are describing the length of time. The focus is always on the duration, not on the starting moment. Now, imagine another everyday situation. You call a friend, but they don't answer immediately. Later, they call you back and say, "Sorry, I couldn't answer earlier. I was in a meeting for 2 hours." Here, the person is explaining the length of the meeting. The exact time the meeting started is not important. Only the duration matters. And that is why the word for appears naturally. So here is the key idea to remember. Whenever you talk about time expressions like 2 hours, 3 days, 5 years, 10 minutes, a long time, or several weeks, the word you usually need is for. You are describing duration, and you are answering the question how long. When you understand that simple idea, using for becomes very natural. You don't need to stop and think too much, and your sentences can continue smoothly. Now that we understand for, let's move to the second word, since. The word since is also very common in English conversations. You will hear it when people talk about time, experiences, or situations that started in the past and continue until now. But since answers a different question. Not how long, but when did it start? So while for focuses on the length of time, since focuses on the starting moment. For example, I have lived here since 2020. She has worked here since January. We have been friends since childhood. In these sentences, the speaker is not talking about the length of time directly. Instead, they're talking about the moment when something began. 2020, January, childhood. These are all starting points. That is how since works in English. After the word since, we usually mention a specific point in time, such as since yesterday, since last week, since Monday, since this morning, or since last night. All of these expressions describe a starting moment. For example, someone might say, "I've been busy since Monday." In this sentence, Monday is the moment when the busy period started, and the situation continues until now. Now here is something interesting. Sometimes you can answer the same question using either for or since. For example, someone might ask you, "How long have you lived in this city?" You could say, "I have lived here for 5 years." Or you could say, "I have lived here since 2019. Both sentences communicate almost the same idea, but the focus is slightly different. When you say for 5 years, you focus on the duration. When you say since 2019, you focus on the beginning. Both are correct and natural. Now, let's talk about one very common mistake. Many learners say something like, "I have lived here since 2 years." This sentence sounds logical to many learners, but it is not correct in English. The reason is simple. Since cannot describe duration. It can only describe a starting point. So instead of saying that sentence, we should say, "I have lived here for 2 years." Or we can say, "I have lived here since 2022. When you describe a length of time, you use for. When you describe a starting moment, you use since. That small difference will help you avoid one of the most common mistakes in English conversation. Now, before we finish, let's do a short speaking exercise together. If you can, try to say these sentences out loud. Speaking out loud is one of the best ways to build confidence. I have been learning English for 2 years. I have been learning English since 2023. I have lived in this city for a long time. I have lived here since I was a child. These sentences are simple, but they are also very natural English. The more you say sentences like these, the more comfortable English will feel in your daily life. If this episode helped you understand for and since more clearly, please like this video and subscribe to Learn English Podcast 360. We create simple English conversations to help you feel more confident speaking English every day. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you in the next episode.